Afternoon, everyone. I'm Claire from the Community Safety Partnership. Just to let you know, we are expecting a few more people to join the call, so we'll just give it 2 more minutes and then we'll make a start. Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. We will be hosting the Bitesize awareness session for fraud and rogue traders this afternoon. If I can ask you all to keep your microphones muted, and if you use the chats function for any questions that you've got, we'll do our best to keep up to date with those as we go through, and there will be time for questions at the end. We will be sending out copies of the slides after the event has finished, along with a link to an evaluation that we will also put in the chat. We'd be really grateful if you could fill that evaluation form in and send it back to us so that we've got really useful feedback. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to David Keys from Trading Standards, who will start the event.
Hi, my name is David Keys. I'm a Trading Standards Officer and a financial investigator with Heart of the Southwest Trading Standards Service. I'm here with my colleague Quinn Marshman, who's also a joint lead for this part of the work that we do. It's one of the many areas that Trading Standards cover. And Quinn's just going to get our presentation up on the screen so that we can get going.
Yeah, that's just what I'm hoping. Hold on a minute. Let me just... I've transferred it to my other screen, so hold on a minute. Let me just...
While Quinn's doing that, there it is. So yeah, so Heart of the Southwest Trading Standards Service, we cover a massive area.
hang on.
We're trading standard services that are the Devon County Council, Plymouth City Council, Torbay Council, and also Somerset Council. We've all joined together to create one slightly larger trading standard service. So we do cover a massive area of the country. And doorstep crime and rogue trading is one of our priority areas of work. It's not our only priority area. We have I think it's 4 or 5 different priorities, but this is the one that Quinn and I currently oversee. So doorstep crime and cold calling, which also includes energy fraud, things such as your solar panels and insulation that goes in lofts. It covers that whole area of work, and it's also a priority not just for us, but it is for the national trading standards across the country, as well as Trading Standards Southwest and ourselves. So we get quite a lot of our projects and work coming down from the national trading standards as well as in-house here. And so if we move on to the definition of what we consider to be doorstep crime and road trading,
Yeah, hold on a sec, Dave. I'm just going to try and close the this a minute. Hold on. I don't know why it's being a bit strange. Hold on.
Apologies for this. It's
Yeah, no, it's
technical issues.
it's all me, Dave, not you. I can't get rid of this the next slide, so we'll just go with it. So I think that's what we'll do.
Right. Yeah.
So if I just bring up.
So for us in trading standards, doorstep crime is now been lumped in with rogue trading. We seem to have gone away from your typical person knocking on the door to come and offer work at a cheap price, or they got leftover material from a job they're doing down the road, and it now has moved into rogue trading, where people can advertise to look legitimate, have a website, appear on trusted trader types platforms, but they still come round to people's houses, either invited or uninvited. The people they're calling on used to be mostly older adults and the vulnerable, but because they now have websites and appear on company's house, it can affect anyone. They normally offer the property repairs. We have a lot of roofing work at the moment, mostly because if you are slightly more elderly or vulnerable, chances are you can't get up on the roof to check that the work they're doing has been done. So we have a lot of problems with roofing, but also your tarmac, block paving, fascias, soffits, and also gardening. We do also have people that go door to door selling meat, fish, furniture, mobility aids, and anything like that could assist people staying in their own homes, and they think people think they're doing a nice thing by coming around and offering these kind of things, but most of the time, in our experience, they're not. The price that they're charging can be extortionate. They take large deposits up front and then either don't come back, or if they do come back, they do poor work. They charge for stuff that isn't needed, but people might think they need it. They're very good at talking you into stuff, or they deliberately damage your property in order to obtain work. We've had people fire stones up onto a roof using a catapult from another side of the road in order to crack a tile, so that then they can go up onto knock on the person's door and say, "We can repair your roof. I've just noticed you got a damaged tile," which they might not have known about before. And then if they do carry out some work, they quite often will leave it unfinished. They'll take as much money as they can and then disappear, leaving the work half done. If the work is finished, it's quite often not very good standard. It's not to recommended standards for various things, or they will falsely claim to have done some work, again because people can't always see what work might or might not have been done. So they will say they've done more than they actually have to charge more money. They'll also make false statements about the goods and services being required. We've had people doing a loft installation saying that you have to have it done for various things in order to help you get a mortgage, even though that's quite often the opposite case. And they will claim to be members of trade associations in order to try and elicit work, whereas in reality they're not a member, and they've lifted the logo from the website and just put it onto theirs to make themselves look more legitimate than they actually are. And I just pass. No, sorry. Yeah, so they'll also use intimidating or aggressive behaviour quite often. They range from one to the other. They are extremely intimidating and threatening to the person who's having the work done in order to get it done, or they'll go completely the other way and be as friendly as possible, and sort of groom their victims into thinking they're the good guys, and anyone that comes around, such as ourselves or the police, are actually getting in the way of their relationship and what they can do for each other. And that can be quite challenging for us when we try and tell them that they're being ripped off. It doesn't always have to be a knock at the door. Sometimes they can be preceded by a cold call on the telephone, which is where your loft insulation fits into this more than other sort of things. So they will call you and say they're working on behalf of council on some green energy type scheme. The loft insulation you've got either needs to be taken out, or you need to put some in because certain legislation has changed, or some other spurious reason, and try and talk you into having that work done. And the people that we deal with that are involved in this kind of crime, they're also associated with other kind of crimes, such as distraction, burglary, and sneak-in thefts. We've had instances where one person will knock on the door, keep the person talking, trying to talk them into having some work done, and their mate's gone round the back to check whether the doors are open, popped in the house and stolen money or property that is worth getting if they don't get the work. And I'll
Yeah,
hand over to Quinn.
thanks, Dave. Yeah, so just picking up on that last point, there was one case I was involved in with colleagues where the offenders actually stole a check from this old man's checkbook, and rather stupidly they made it out to themselves, and that was actually how we traced them. Think of those 3 individuals. Certainly 2 of them got prison sentences. I think the 3rd may have got a suspended sentence. So is it a large scale crime? Well, we cover Devon, Torbay, Plymouth and Somerset County Council area, so it's a large area. But for last year, there were 265 reports of doorstep crimes, rogue trading incidents, just in Devon alone. The total contract value of those was £2,679,917. So it's a substantial amount of money we're talking about. And the other factor to bear in mind is that research that's been done in the past, which is admittedly is old, it's from 2001, but basically this kind of criminality is massively underreported. So at that time, it was estimated that only 1 in 10 people actually reported this kind of crime. So there is a big difference. That figure of 2 million will be way under the amount of money that has actually been lost by consumers. We do our best when we're aware of what's going on to assist and intervene, and last year we managed to get refunds of almost £50,000 for consumers, and we also prevented another almost £16,000 from being handed over as a result of us getting involved with what was going on. The most complained about traders or perhaps not traders is the wrong word, but trade sectors, roofing, roof sealing, roofing and chimneys is the biggest by far, but these are the top 10 that we had last year, and that was closely followed by insulation. And increasingly we're seeing problems with major renovations. That's partly as a result of COVID and people deciding to basically have work done on their properties rather than move. And some of the problems we believe are due to the fact that people who perhaps were jobbing handymen in the past have suddenly decided they're able to do major renovations, and sadly the fact is that they're not. And then the other areas we have as well, gardeners and tree surgeons is a fairly common area of concern for us, paving driveways and patios, and then renewable energy, guttering, drains, and that sort of thing. One of the sort of modus operandi of these people is they like to do work which it's very difficult for their victims to look at. So as David said, you know, an old lady or anyone for that matter is unlikely to get on a roof and actually start looking at what the problem is. Equally, they're less likely to go into the loft and look at the insulation. And generally, if it's a major renovation project of a building, they are probably they might have some awareness of what's going on, but they won't know all the details of everything. So yeah. So the victims, well, as David said, in the past, the typical victim of this sort of crime was most frequently an 81-year-old female living on her own. Easy pickings for these kind of people. That has definitely changed. There is no current research on what the typical victim would be, but I would say that the age demographic has changed considerably. A lot of that is because, as David has pointed out, in the past, these people would knock on doors to get work, but they don't do that anymore. What they tend to do is use trader platforms. So, you know, where people can go and say, I'm looking for someone to do this, and they get given leads and get given a couple of people, and the platform takes, say, a proportion of what the cost will be, or a flat fee, and then they put the consumer in touch with the builder. The other thing that we're increasingly finding is that these guys tend to use social media a lot more to advertise, so they will put themselves on buy and sell groups and local groups offering their services. So yeah, but as I said, particularly traded platforms and social media are becoming increasingly common. And the problem with trade approval platforms is that they vary considerably in what checks they do on people they allow onto their websites. So some of them will do some checks, but others do absolutely none at all. And it's really important, we always stress to people, that when you're looking at those sites and using them, you need to check what checks they are doing. You need to read the small print, because that can be a problem. Sorry, I don't know quite why that has suddenly done that. Hold on, sorry. Oh, there we go. Right. The emotional and financial impact of these crimes is very high. People lose huge sums of money, and they also have concerns because these people are in their house. So it's very, very debilitating for people. So again, previous study, wider public health issues, as studies into the impact of doorstep crime on older victims has shown that their health declines faster than non-victims of a similar age. So a victim of a doorstep crime is 2.4 times more likely to be in residential care 2 years after the incident compared to a neighbour who's not been through that experience. Many of the victims are reluctant to report the crimes to the authorities or their friends or family because they are embarrassed, frightened, or worry it may mean a loss of independence. And one of the things that we stress to people, and I really, really encourage them to do, is actually tell everyone what's happened to them. And I tell them they've not been foolish, they've just been unfortunate in that they've been very trusting, and you know, unfortunately, that has led to what's happened. And one of the best things they can do is tell people what's happened to them, particularly because we don't expect this sort of criminality to happen in Devon. If you live in a sleepy little village like my parents in North Devon, you just don't expect this sort of thing to happen, but unfortunately it does. So there are the common misperceptions of the public are that you know, there's a contract between the consumer and the tradesman, the builder or the roofer or whatever, and therefore, you know, that's the end of it. There's a contract, and so they're bound by it, and that is correct. It will be civil, and anyone entering into a contract does have civil rights of redress. So that's repair, replacement, refund. What's provided needs to be of satisfactory quality. It must be fit for purpose, and it must have been carried out with reasonable care and skill. And if those things haven't happened, then there will be a breach of contract. However, that doesn't stop the matter also being criminal, and that's where trading standards comes in. So we have no involvement in civil disputes at all, but it is highly likely that where there is a breach of contract, there is very likely to be some issue in terms of criminal behaviour. Okay, Dave, I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you. And just picking up on something Quinn said a minute ago about people being more likely to go into residential care, and they should tell people. We carry out interviews with members of the public that are being caught by these scams, and one of the things we have heard is people are so upset and embarrassed by it that they just want to themselves. You know, we've had people say that I just want to not get up in the morning. I'm so upset and embarrassed by what's happened to me that I don't want to carry on. And that's one of the main reasons that we do tell people you need to talk to someone, whether that's a family, a friend, a doctor, whoever, you know, just for their own mental well-being, as well as helping stop other people being taken by the same people. And where we come in, we have some criminal legislation which enables us to tackle these kind of tradespeople. One of the most used ones that we have is the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations. They're soon to be replaced themselves by the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act, and they in turn did replace the old Trade Descriptions Act, which some people may have heard of, and they made it better than the old Trade Descriptions Act did because they stopped consumers from being able to do things, which I'll come on to in a minute. We also have a piece of legislation called the Consumer Contracts Information Cancellation and Additional Charges Regulations. Again, these say certain things that the trader has to provide to the consumer for a contract to be valid and enforceable by them if things go wrong. And any possible bit of criminality under those two regulations could also be mirrored in the Fraud Act. So for the more serious damage that's caused, we could also look at charging people under the Fraud Act. And because Quinn and I are both financial investigators, we are able to follow the money. Like Quinn said earlier on, he had a case where someone stole that check. We managed to trace that check through the banks, and the Proceeds of Crime Act gives us the power to essentially get people's bank statements if we believe that there's been some kind of crime committed. So if we move on to the consumer protection regulations. So some of the main things that are prohibited under this are to give a false statement. So you mustn't lie, basically. Under the old Trade Descriptions Act, if someone didn't ask you a question, you didn't have to tell them the answer. So a lot of your dodgy car dealers, if someone didn't say to the car dealer, has this car been clocked, they didn't have to tell you. Now, under these regulations, they do. So if they have to tell you everything that's possible with to go wrong with something, and they can't omit to tell you something. So we've got a misleading action, and we've also got a misleading omission. So if you tell someone something, it has to be true, but you can't now not tell someone something that's essential to the contract and could make that person change their mind. So with the false statements, they shouldn't tell lies about the price. So they shouldn't go in with a low price and then vastly increase it. We have a lot of instances where someone will come in and say, we can clean the moss off your roof for £59. As soon as they get up there, the whole roof needs replacing at a cost of £30,000. So that this legislation stops people from being able to do that. Again, they shouldn't overcharge. So when they're charging £30,000 for a roof that should have only cost 10, it's covered by this. They mustn't tell a lie to say that they were working in the area, or they've got leftover tarmac from a council job, or something like that, or the neighbours are having work done when they're not, things like that. They also mustn't tell you a lie about having work done for safety concerns. We've had 3 really big storms recently. We have these kind of traders will go in and say, if you don't have the work done, if we have another storm like that, your roof will blow off. When it's just got through those 3 storms and it's perfectly fine. And also any of those kind of lies that cause the consumer to enter into that contract when they wouldn't have done would make it an offence. And this is also mirrored in the Fraud Act by a fraud by false representation. So For the more serious lies, we can also look at them under fraud, as well as the more lower value regulations that we cover. So on the other side, like I said, you can't now omit to tell people someone. So if there's something that is material information for the work that they need doing or don't need doing, they have to tell you. And failure to tell them, or failure to provide a price for the job so that they can then charge what they like, or if they refuse to give their name or their address or any other information that can identify that person and allow the victim to take a civil claim on their paperwork, again, it's an offence under this legislation. They also have to provide a cancellation notice. So if you're having work done on your house and the contract is concluded at your house rather than the trader's office, they have to, by law, give you the opportunity to change your mind. And that is by giving a cancellation notice, giving 14 days in which you can think about it and say, actually, no, I don't want the work to go ahead. This gives you time to get other quotes, talk to family, talk to friends, and make sure that you're happy. If they don't give you that notice, again, they could be committing a criminal offence, and the contract may not be enforceable, so they're not entitled to any money. There are exceptions to that, which I'll come on to in a minute. And if any of those, again, cause the consumer to agree that contract when they probably wouldn't have done, then it's something that we can look at. And it's also, again, mirrored in the Fraud Act by failing to give information which they're under a legal duty to give, which so we can investigate them for that, which is, again, a more serious offence. Under that legislation, there's also some practices that are just completely banned. So whereas the ones before, the omission and the false statements, it had to have an effect on the consumer and cause them to do something that they wouldn't have done. The things in the banned practice are just considered unfair, and it doesn't matter whether it caused the consumer to carry on with the contract. They're just not allowed to do it. There's quite a few of them. We've just given a few of the main ones here. So things like giving the rights to consumers in law as a feature of the offer. So using a 14-day cancellation period to entice the deal when they have to give that anyway. It's not something that is going to entice someone into a contract, or it shouldn't be. That would be an unfair term. If they claim membership of any kind of trade body, so they could say they're covered by the Glass and Glazing Federation or another body like that, and they're not, that's just a banned practice, and it would be an offence. And if they make a material inaccurate claim about the risk to personal security of the consumer or their family, if they don't enter into that contract, such as your roof will cave in and it could kill someone in the house or passerby if something falls on their head, when that's not true, that would be a banned practice, and again would be covered by fraud by false representation. And then if we move on to another part of the legislation, which is an aggressive commercial practice. So no trader can harass or coerce or use undue influence in order to gain a job. So they can't come in and say that needs doing because the driveway will collapse, or they can't just come in and start work without your say so. We have had people who have knocked on the door to say, would you like your driveway done? And they've said, can I think about it? Come back from the shops and found there's a big hole dug in their driveway, and they started saying, well, now we started, you'll have to pay us, otherwise we just walk away and leave the hole in your driveway. We would consider that as being an aggressive practice to try and get the customer to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So again, that would be an offence that we can look at, which is also covered by the fraud of obtaining the services dishonestly. And then we've also got professional diligence. So this is a sort of catch-all for the legislation. So if the work person didn't do the job using their professional diligence, special skill and care, which everyone would reasonably expect to be used when you have work done. So if you have a driveway done and they don't dig out to suitable depth to lay that driveway, which means that after a few months you're driving on it and it just all comes away, or it collapses under the rain. If they threaten the customer or they start that work without consent, add them all together and you could have another offence of professional diligence. It's not what you expect from a legitimate bona fide trader. And again, that is a fraud by participating in a fraudulent business. So that covers most of that consumer protection legislation. We then move on to the cancellation regs. So, like I say, if you enter into a contract at your home where the price is agreed, you sign up on the day saying, "Yeah, I'm happy with that price. I want to go ahead," then that's covered by these cancellation regulations. They're also covered if you enter into a contract and you're not in the trader's normal place of business. But if it's for emergency work or the contract is less than £42, it's not covered by these regs. But for everything else, it is, and that makes the trader provide that notice I was talking about, which gives people 14 days to have a think, get other quotes, have a chat with people, and properly decide if they want to go ahead. This is one of the most expensive things they've ever had to do if they're having a roof done or a massive driveway work, and it's not something that should be decided on the spot. They should be given that chance to just have a think and change their mind if they want. The trader shouldn't start the work within those 14 days unless the consumer really wants it to go ahead, and then they have to give express permission in writing to say, yes, please, I want you to start within that 14 days because I really want this work done. If the customer doesn't do that, then the trader could be in breach and they might not be entitled to any work. The customer can still cancel that contract even within the 14 days, but then they will have to pay a reasonable amount of money for the work that's been done, but only if the notice was given and they've given that express permission in writing for it to start. And the offences that we cover under those regulations is if they do not provide that cancellation notice to the consumer, or they fail to provide material information such as their name, their address, how long the work could take, what the total price is, including VAT or tax on top if that's charged, and a few other bits and pieces. And again, if they don't do what they say, this could also fall foul of the Fraud Act by failing to disclose information under a legal duty to provide. And then we've put these in, like I say, because Quinn and I are accredited under the Process of Crime Act, but we can seize cash from someone if we believe it to be over £1,000, and we also believe that it is a proceed of a crime. So it has to be given by the consumer in these kind of cases to the trader, and they've got it on their person when we go around. We could seize that cash under the Process of Crime and have it detained. We can detain it for up to 6 months at a time for a maximum period of 2 years by going to court and asking a magistrate or a district judge for them to authorize it. And we can also have it forfeited, which means that it gets paid into a central government fund and then distributed from there, and it can be used to pay compensation to victims. There are certain financial investigators that can seize and detain property that can also be sold to fulfill court orders imposed. So if we have an investigation where someone has committed a criminal offence and we think that they've made a certain amount of money from their crimes, we can get an order to say you need to pay that money back, or even a greater amount of money if we believe that in the last certain amount of years they've made a lot more money out of their criminality. So we can seize property such as boats, cars, houses, and we can have those things sold. And again, the money can be used to either compensate victims or go into central government funds, and some of it will come back to us to help us to fight crime. Excuse me. We also carry out investigations for money laundering. So if we believe that one of these people is taking money from a victim and then using it for something else, we have a lot of issues at the moment with addiction. So people are going out and getting money from members of the public for this work, and then using the money to gamble or to drink or to take drugs with. We can investigate them for possible money laundering, or if they're using the money to buy artwork or property, that kind of thing. We can also restrain items. So if you're being investigated by us for some criminality, and we think they might sell their house to try and run away, or to just get the money and use it for someone else, we can actually restrain the property from them. So it stops them from selling their house, or we can stop them from selling a boat or a vehicle. We can also freeze money in their bank account that can that could be used to compensate a victim. If we believe the money in their bank account is the money the victim paid in, then we can get an order to have that money restrained, and again forfeited and paid back to the victim, so they're not out of pocket. And we can also use that money to satisfy a confiscation order. So if we convict someone of a criminal offence, we can then, depending on how many charges there are and how long a period the offending's been, we can go back up to 6 years to have a look to see if any other money or property that they've obtained during that time could be from their criminal activities. And if it is, we can get an order to say this amount of money has been obtained by this person over this time. We want them to pay it back. And we've been successful on a few of those.
Thanks, David. There is also the bigger picture that we now consider, something that many years ago we wouldn't have thought about at all. But the issue of modern day slavery is something that we are aware of. So there can also be a far more sinister side to these lovable rogues. And here are just a couple of court cases that have played out over the past couple of years. So there was one family found guilty of subjecting their workers to undergo forced labour as tarmackers. The family received prison sentences totaling 27 years for slavery and kidnap. Another family was jailed for holding people in servitude and compelling them to perform forced labour, namely block paving work. 22 men were rescued, and 2 people were sentenced to 15 years total imprisonment. And there was another family who were all convicted of conspiracy to require a person to perform forced or compulsory labour. Again, in this case, it was tarmacking and block paving. The investigation had commenced when a decomposing body was discovered after being fly tipped, when that poor individual couldn't work anymore. And the driver was involved in a road traffic collision when trying to escape. In this instance, 19 men were rescued and the family were jailed for 18 years and 9 months. And one member of the family was ordered to repay £1.5 million under the Proceeds of Crime Act. So that's the legislation and some of the things that have happened in the past. Now, what we really like to try and focus on in these presentations is warning signs for people and also the do's and don'ts. The sad reality is that the level of this kind of criminality is so frequent that we will never stop all of it, and there are not enough people in trading standards and the police and other enforcement agencies to deal with it. So, but there are certain warning signs that we would really want to make people aware of. So, and the more of these you get, the more the warning signs should be ringing. So, people knocking on the door without an appointment, people starting work immediately, people finding extra work. So, as David has said, you start off with a small job, which might be cleaning out the gutters. Then they find for say £50, £100. Then they find a couple of loose slates on the roof. Then they go on the roof and start taking off the ridge tiles. Then they decide that the whole roof needs replacing. And before you know it, you're looking at something that's gone from £500 to £10,000 or £20,000. And that can happen in a day. So, and the pressure then is really placed on people to get this work done. There's poor workmanship. Sometimes they demand cash only. They may initially say, yes, you can pay by check or whatever, but actually when it comes to payment, they only want cash. The reason for that is cash is not traceable. They behave aggressively. They may threaten to remove the goods if people don't pay. So if you've had a driveway laid, they might then say, or say windows installed or a roof done, they will say, well, if you're not going to pay us, we're just going to come and rip it all out. They will make repeated demands for payment. They will not give paperwork, or they will wait until after the work has started or payment has been received. sometimes the initial contact was an unsolicited phone call offering a free survey or a government grant. And it always seems to be that free surveys always result in significant work being done. In terms of payment, if they don't request cash, then they will often ask for payment to be made to a random name or individual, not to the person that's actually doing the work. And I've had various explanations for that, you know, it's actually their mate, but they owe them some money, and rather than paying me and you're going to have, I'm then going to pay my mate, perhaps you could just pay them direct for me. We've had incidents of people buying cars for people, all sorts of things going on. They will often groom their victims, so they will do repeat visits. They may come once and they then may settle into a very cozy relationship with particularly more elderly, vulnerable and lonely people, because these people can be very charming, and they like the company. And the other thing to be very, very wary of is when these people offer to drive the customers to the bank. Now, under the banking protocol, the banks are supposed to notify the police when people who appear elderly or vulnerable in any way try to withdraw probably more than about £5,000 at a time. That seems to work fairly well, but not all the time. And obviously that doesn't work if they're just getting people to transfer money, you know, via bank transfer or whatever. So now on to the do's and don'ts. We'll start with the don'ts. Don't agree to work offered by unsolicited doorstep callers. Don't rely on posts or recommendations on social media sites or trader approval platforms without doing your own research. So what will often happen is you will look on perhaps social media or or one of these trader approval platforms, and there will be good reviews. But actually, quite often those reviews are just left by their friends. They're not actually from real customers. Don't be swayed by glossy flyers or impressive websites, as they may not even show the trader's own work. So what they will do is they will just use stock photos of roofs or driveways or whatever, and they'll make out that it's their own work when it isn't. Don't pay cash or agree to be taken to the bank or transfer money before any work has started, and don't be rushed into making a decision. So those are all really, really important things that we encourage people to not to do. And then on the flip side, there are things that we really, really recommend people to do. So that is, get 3 written quotes from reputable businesses, research the companies yourself, ask for references and look online. So if you've got a company who, you know, say they've got loads of references, say, well, actually, I want to phone some of these people up, and perhaps possibly even go around and look at the work, or at least talk to them, and maybe they can send me some photos or that sort of thing. Ask friends and family to recommend local traders, or search via some trader approval schemes. For example, Trading Standards run a scheme called Buy with Confidence, and we vet all the traders on that scheme. So we have been out and we have met them. We've checked their paperwork's all right. We've checked whether there is any history on those individuals and those businesses. Decide who to use in your own time and make sure you have confidence in their skills and abilities. So sometimes what people might do is they might have them do a very small job first and then use that to test the water and then decide whether or not they want them to do further work. Now, as I said before, there has been a move of perhaps people who in the past did fairly basic, you know, handyman jobs, moving into bigger sort of property transformations and renovations. So you still need to be very wary about that. If you're getting someone to start knocking down load-bearing walls and putting in RSJs and that sort of thing, then you really want to have gone and looked at another property where they've done that work. Make sure that you have the full name of the company and the person doing the work and their contact details, address, phone number, email, and keep this as proof. Check if you're entitled to your 14-day cooling off period. As David had said, in broad terms, as long as it's not an emergency, and as long as it's been agreed in your own home, you will be entitled to a 14-day cooling off period. Ask the company if they have an alternative dispute resolution policy. Who do you complain to if there's a problem? Pay by bank transfer so the payment is traceable. If you can, use a credit card for payments of over between £100 and £30,000, because if you have a claim for breach of contract, then that goes against the suppliers of the goods or service, but also it gives you the same claim against your credit card company. So they are equally liable. Ask to see professional qualifications, public liability insurance, and if applicable, waste carrier's license. Unlicensed carriers will often fly tip your waste at roadsides and beauty spots, and you could end up facing an unlimited fine if your waste ends up fly tipped and you cannot show that you took reasonable steps to prevent it. So a sort of, oh, well, I didn't know, isn't actually good enough. Now, you can actually check on the Environment Agency website whether the company you're dealing with has a waste carrier's license. Always ask what's going to happen to it, to ensure that it's being disposed of appropriately. And, you know, as with all these things, a legitimate professional waste carrier should not object to being asked reasonable questions. And that goes for any tradesman. If you're asking a reasonable question and they are evasive or unwilling to provide an answer, then that speaks volumes in itself. And in terms of waste, make sure you get a receipt and retain it as proof. If you're interested in energy saving measures, so insulation is probably the biggest one at the moment, then there are organisations you can get advice from, the Energy Saving Trust and also Energy Saving Devon, and we've done quite a lot of work with both of those, or certainly with Energy Saving Devon. If you're concerned that rogue traders are operating in your area, please report it to Citizens Advice, because it's important we know about it. And if you're concerned that someone is at immediate risk, always call the police. Essentially, if someone knocks on your door and you're not sure, just don't open it. You know, there's no point exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. And all those do's and don'ts are things that we repeat time and time again, and we would really encourage everybody who's in this session to pass on those do's and don'ts to people. Okay, back to you, David.
I'm just realised we might have gone slightly over time, so if just checking they're happy for us to carry on for another 5 or so minutes. Yeah, lovely. So these are some recent prosecutions that we've taken, just to highlight the kind of things that we look at. So this chap, Samuel Harvey from Barntsville, he benefited from his crimes to the tune of about £214,000. That wasn't what we investigated, but when we did investigate him, the crime that we convicted him for, which were 3 offences under the Fraud Act and 2 under the Consumer Protection Regulations, where he ran a landscaping business up in North Devon. We had complaints from people where he took tens of thousands of pounds for work that he either didn't start or didn't complete. His victims came from Plymouth area, Barntsville, Bideford, Ilfracombe, and as far away as Bridgend and Swansea up in Wales. Some people did get their work started and not completed, but they had to pay other traders to actually complete that work properly. Harvey himself had been convicted by Bristol Trading Standards only a year or so before we looked at him, and he had a suspended prison sentence. So then when we investigated him, they activated that suspended prison sentence and sent him to jail for the crimes that we investigated. The judge wasn't very happy. He actually told Harvey he'd left people feeling guilty and stupid when the fault does not lie with them. Like we said, it's not their fault. They've just been unlucky. And Harvey was very, very good at talking people into doing something that they didn't want. He left people feeling unsure and insecure as to who they could trust in the future, which is a common theme from these kind of things. And when sentencing, she said she had to take into account his mitigation and early guilty plea when he was sentenced to prison time, but he was also banned from running or managing a business in his name for a period of 10 years. But because we investigated him for those tens of thousands of pounds, we were then able to go back over the previous 5 or 6 years and have a look through his bank accounts, and we could see that he'd actually taken £215,000 from people rather than just the 10,000 we were looking at. And we managed to get an order under the Proceeds of Crime Act to say you must repay that £214,000 at some point. Now, Mr. Harvey had no money. He'd spent all the money he'd taken off victims on various things, and he was left with £1. So that's all he's paid back at the moment. And although it doesn't sound very good that he's only paid £1, the outstanding balance that he owes will stay with him for the rest of his life. So if we ever get wind that he's inherited a house or he's won the lottery or got a good job or anything where he's now got money in his account, we can go back to court and we can say, right, we now want him to pay the outstanding balance. So although it doesn't sound great that he only paid £1, he's a young man and he will have that hanging over him for the rest of his life, and we can revisit it at any point. So it's another good tool to try and stop people from doing this again. Another person pressured a vulnerable pensioner into having loft insulation removed and charging them £2,000, and then bombarded them with aggressive calls demanding pay another £5,000. Has been prosecuted a couple of years ago. This chap called Gary Almond, he was a director of a company called Solar and Shine Limited, which has now been dissolved. Again, he pleaded guilty to 2 of our consumer protection regulation offences. He also had to pay £2,000 in compensation to the victim, as well as £1,000 in fines and costs for the going to court. He came to our attention when he went to see a pensioner in Torbay to clean solar panels. The victim was housebound, couldn't get out and have a look, and was persuaded that spray foam insulation shed in a loft somebody else needed to be urgently removed because it was a danger to her property. That wasn't true, and charged her £7,000 with a £2,000 deposit. She paid the £2,000 deposit. They then came and made a right mess in her loft and left with a post-dated cheque for the balance. Luckily, the bank blocked the second payment, and he then started aggressively phoning the victim, demanding that she paid a £5,000 in another way or send another cheque, do it by bank transfer. A relative of that lady actually found out about it, and it was them that called us for us to then investigate. So he was prosecuted for that professional diligence charge that we were talking about, where he didn't use reasonable care and skill. He was also aggressive. He also lied, and all of those added together became a professional diligence. Again, the judge said that the victim was vulnerable and therefore they were taken advantage of, but again gave him credit for pleading guilty and saying he showed genuine remorse. Otherwise, the penalty would have been higher. He also said he was going to recompense the victim, but I'm yet to hear that that's been done. But we haven't checked in for a little while, but hopefully he will do at some point.
Okay, I'm going to miss this one out, Dave. I'm going to go to the last one.
That's fine.
So this is actually one that David did. So that's why I'm reading this, to save him his blushes. But he'll probably correct me if I've got any of the bits, any of the facts wrong. Essentially, a rogue trader was ordered to repay £27,500 to an elderly victim. after convincing a pensioner to let him carry out roofing work that wasn't needed. The victim from Somerset used her life savings. Mervyn Richards of Swindon was ordered to pay a fine of £6,500, a small victim surcharge, and £4,250 towards prosecution costs, and £27,500 in compensation after pleading guilty at Taunton Magistrates Court. He'd been prosecuted by us for one offence under the Consumer Protection from Fair Trading regulations. Initially, he'd responded to a job advert asking for repair on a roof. He'd visited the property and told the elderly householder that the repair could only be guaranteed if the whole roof was replaced, at a cost of £27,500. The victim called Avon and Somerset Police, who contacted us. Excuse me. An independent surveyor later examined the roof and concluded the work was not reasonably necessary, was overcharged, not in accordance with the British standards or the invoice, and the value of work was estimated to be nil because basically it would all need to be redone. Summing up, District Judge Brereton said that the victim was elderly and had used their life savings to pay for the work, but gave Richards credit for his guilty plea, that he showed genuine remorse and is committed to recompensing the victim. Has he done that, David? Do we know?
He's paying it back at around about £500 a month. So it's going to take quite a long time, but unfortunately that's all he told the court he could afford.
Right. Okay. So that's just a few examples of some cases we've taken to court. Just very quickly, so we do have stickers, no cold caller stickers. If people want them, we can send those out to you. And we also have 2 little guides on dealing with rogue traders and finding a builder. Again, we can make those available if people want them. Here are our contact details, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and then links to our website. David and my details are down here. We would always encourage you to actually email tradingstandards@devon.gov or call that number rather than come to us direct, because if we're not in the office, then it won't get picked up, and it will always be quicker to send it there. If it's a matter that's you're reporting for a member of the public, then really it needs to go through to the citizens' advice. So yeah.
And just while we're on that,
sorry.
Quinn, there is a question in the chat about if we have a potential case, who do we contact? So it was a good job, you said that. But yeah, all trading standards matters are dealt with by a central hub that's run by the Citizens Advice Bureau. So the number is advertised on our website, I think it is, and also on the internet. But yeah, they need to ring the advice line or contact us form for the Citizens Advice, and then they will pass it through to us.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you both very much.
Sorry, that was a bit longer than we meant it to be, but
we will address any questions that are in the chat at the end of this. And we will be sharing these slides with everybody who's registered for the session, so they'll have all these contact details. In the meantime, I'm now going to pass on to Paul Griffiths from Devon and Cornwall Police, and over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, David and Quinn. That was really helpful. You're clearly doing so much invaluable work, and there's a lot of crossover between what we do. So there will be a bit of repetition. I'm just making sure I've got my slides up. And where they've gone into quite a lot of detail, I think my presentation is sort of more of a surface level of fraud offences in the UK, and how to spot them, and what you can do to report it. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Detective Sergeant Paul Griffiths. I've spent years investigating fraud. Last year, I moved to the southwest and I joined Devon and Cornwall Police, transferring from the Met Police in London. We'll come to what is and what isn't investigated by the police later, but part of my role today is to investigate serious and complex fraud cases across the South Devon area. Fraud is the most reported crime type in the UK and is still a fast growing threat. So I hope to show you today how it works, some of its impact, as we've already seen this afternoon, and what you can do to protect yourself as well. It's a huge area of crime. As I've said, this presentation will just cover the basics, as a surface level overview of what fraud is. So it's not just numbers on a screen, it's real lives disrupted, savings wiped out, trust shattered. So knowledge is power. I hope to arm you with some insights on how to spot fraud, how to stop it, and how to seek help when it strikes. So what is it? So at its core, fraud is deception for financial or personal gain. It can take many forms, but the essence is usually always the same. It's manipulating somebody into handing over money, data, or assets. And fraudsters are very clever, as David and Quinn have rightly pointed out. They don't only target vulnerable people. The methods they employ are very clever. They can exploit human psychology, trust, and manipulate urgency, and they prey on fear to achieve their ultimate goal, which is to relieve you or anyone of their money and their assets. From simple phishing scams and sophisticated investment scams, their methods are constantly evolving to stay one step ahead. Now, what are common types of fraud? So I'm sure some of you have heard of phishing scams. So this is perhaps one of the most common types of fraud in the UK. These would be emails or text messages or calls, and the caller or the person sending the email is trying to trick you into giving up your personal data. So this could quite simply be receiving a phone call from somebody purporting to be O2 when they aren't. And that could be a phishing scam. They want your personal details so they can go on to commit further fraud offences, or so they can share those details with other people to do the same. Investment scams are quite often where somebody is offering an unrealistic return to lure victims. If it looks too good to be true, it usually is, as I'm sure most of you are aware. Now, investment scams quite often take place in completely unregulated sectors of the market, and victims can regularly end up transferring significant sums into people's personal accounts, thinking that they're investing in wine or gold or whiskey, when in fact they're just transferring their own money directly into the fraudster's bank account. Now, romance fraud is where somebody uses a fake identity, sometimes on a dating site, and they emotionally manipulate victims into sending them money. Sadly, this can often turn into a blackmail offence where they're sending them personal images or information that the fraudster then threatens to share with family or friends, and then they blackmail them for money. So a fraud enabling a further type of fraud. And then we've also got impersonation fraud. So that is where somebody might pose as a legitimate entity, like your bank, to request money. And I think fortunately, institutions like banks have got really significant measures in place to prevent this today. I think if any of you have tried to send more than a few £1,000s via online banking, it becomes very difficult, and you often get a phone call from the bank, which is really good, just to make sure that you are sending it to somebody you know and you know what you're paying for. And then finally on the list there, advance fee fraud. This will be where somebody offers a larger sum of money if a small amount of money is paid. So, for example, you might receive an out of the blue contact about receiving an inheritance from somebody that you didn't know perhaps, and that could be released to you for a small fee. That small fee will often snowball into a larger and larger amount, and the victim will never receive that money. And of course, we've already heard in detail about road traders and doorstep crime. Now, each of these types of fraud plays on trust and emotion, which makes them really, really effective. Now, again, we've covered some of this, but these are really clear signs that you are a victim of fraud, or somebody is trying to defraud you of your money or your data. So it often leaves a trail of red flags. But when you are the victim of fraud, they are really, really difficult to spot, because the people committing the fraud are playing with your emotions and they're manipulating the circumstances. So the key signs to look out for are high pressure tactics. Things like act now or you'll lose your chance. Now, I know it was really useful to hear about the cancellation regulations in the Rogue Trader presentation, because that highlights exactly why they exist. So that cooling off period enables you to stop and think and take a breath about what you might be signing up for, and prevent somebody from pressuring you into parting with your hard-earned money. You've got to watch out for unsolicited offers. So be skeptical of out of the blue claims that you might have won a prize or come into some inheritance. Fraudsters will often prey on requests for secrecy. They will tell the victim not to discuss the situation with others, and in certain crime types, the shame and embarrassment of what might have happened will enable the fraud to continue, because the longer it is that you seek help, as we'll see later, the harder it is to investigate those offences. Look out for strange payment methods. I don't imagine any legitimate business would probably ask you to pay via a cryptocurrency, or for payment through a gift card, or really through PayPal, especially for services. Usually you wouldn't see that, so watch out for that sort of strange payment methods. And then the last one, if there's email or text message communication, something as simple as poor grammar or mismatched details across different attachments to emails could tip you off. It's highly unlikely that a financial institution or a solicitor will get those details wrong, or they will trip up on spelling and grammar. So that might just be something else to watch out for. Now, if you are a victim of fraud, how do you report it? Well, there's a number of ways. My advice would be to call the police, 101. If it's a non-emergency, clearly, if you think it is an emergency, you're at risk of harm, call 999. That's what that number is for. You can report it online to the Devon and Cornwall Police website. I can share those details at the end of the presentation as well. Now, if you've been a victim of fraud involving your bank or money being taken from your bank account, tell your bank provider as well, ideally via the app, so you know you're dealing with your bank rather than somebody else, or directly in branch, and they'll be able to give you advice. Now, the bank has got far greater powers than the police have in terms of being able to put blockers on your account and to do payback requests from accounts where money has been moved into. They can do that much more quickly than the police can. So if you identify that you've been a victim of fraud quickly, I would say informing your bank is one of the first steps you should take. In terms of ongoing investigation, preserve evidence. People are often ashamed or embarrassed about what's happened, and there's absolutely no need to be, and that might lead them on to wanting to delete things or to clear chat logs and history. Now, if we preserve that, we can use that as evidence in criminal proceedings, and that's really useful. So if we save all emails, text messages and communication, that can be helpful as the investigation progresses. And then finally, avoid contact with the fraudster. They will promise anything. They'll promise to give money back. They'll promise to that you can get further money. They will do anything they can to keep the hook on the victim and to keep them engaged and to keep that stream of money going. And they'll do whatever it takes. So if we can stop contacting them, that is always best. So who investigates fraud? Well, we've clearly seen that trading standards investigate a lot of fraud, but there's a lot of crossover. Now, I think the best place to start is probably with action fraud. Now, every report of fraud in the UK will be sent to them. So they are overseen by the City of London Police, who also run the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. And what's Action Fraud's role and what do they do? So as I said, they receive every report of fraud in the UK and they hold that information on a database. Now that database retains identifiers such as telephone numbers, email addresses, and bank accounts used by fraudsters, along with the method that the fraudster uses. When a new case is added to that database, it will search itself and try and identify whether there are other cases linked to the one that you're reporting through those identifiers. So, for example, if the fraudster uses the same bank account to receive the proceeds of crime in 2 cases, that would be a link. So if it does that, if it links 2 crimes together or more than that together, and there are ongoing viable lines of inquiry, Action Fraud will pass an intelligence document to the relevant force area, to the relevant police force, which might be Devon and Cornwall Police, and then they will be responsible for the further investigation of that crime. So quite often, perhaps when a police officer attends an initial report of a crime, they might say, Action Fraud are going to investigate this crime. Now, that's not really true. So Action Fraud don't really investigate things. They might do initial checks with the banks, and they have financial investigators that work for them, so they can do those inquiries. They can do the initial investigation of the crime. But really, the ongoing people who are going to prosecute that case are your regional police officers. So it might be somebody in my department, somebody in a specialist fraud or financial investigation unit working for Devon and Cornwall Police. And yeah, so that would be who will do that ongoing investigation. Now, what do the police investigate? I think again is a really important thing. Now, we like to call it a call to service. So what is the police's call to service to investigate fraud? Now, these parameters are quite tight, and I think that's a bit of a testament to how or what the scale of fraud is in the UK. There's simply too much fraud to investigate every single crime. So these are the parameters that are set by Action Fraud and the City of London Police as guidance to what each individual force area should investigate. So I'll kind of read these off because they're a bit prescriptive. So the police will investigate fraud where there's a call to service. And that means where they have arrested offender for fraud, the offender is actively committing a crime or has recently committed it, or where the suspect is known and is local, and a local suspect is somebody we can identify with the details provided. So it might be that quite often we record details of those fraud reports we get, we record them in our systems, but there's no ongoing lines of inquiry to investigate. And who else investigates fraud? Well, banks and regulatory bodies do as well. Most financial institutions have their own fraud teams and departments. And as has been mentioned before, if somebody goes into a bank, high street branch, and says, this week we had a person go into a bank and try and withdraw £3,000, who said they were going to send it to Elon Musk. Now, fortunately, the bank quickly identified that wasn't going to be true and rang the police straight away. Now that is for the police to go and be involved and to investigate what's happened there and see if we can investigate a suspect, a local suspect who we can identify and we can prosecute. So what to expect when the police are investigating a crime? I think it's important for me to start with what our overall aim will be in a criminal investigation, and that is to get an offender into the criminal justice system and to get them charged and to take them to court. The police should never make assurances about returning money to victims of crime because we don't have the power to do that. If the offences are reported to the bank quickly enough, the bank can sometimes revert payments or place blockers onto accounts to enable a financial investigator to detain that money so we can move it back to the victim, but that has to happen really, really quickly. And then after an investigation, the court can impose financial penalties and orders on an offender. But as we've seen, if there's no available funds to be paid, it might be that the victim has never returned that money. Now, once it's confirmed that police are investigating your crime, it will be allocated to one officer. They should be your point of contact, and they should pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry to prove the offence that they're investigating. Depending on the case, they'll work collaboratively with banks and financial institutions. They'll be accessing both your financial data and that of the suspects. So they might ask you to sign a disclosure document for access to your bank accounts, and they might ask the suspect to do that, or they will apply directly to the court for a court order for the suspect's bank accounts. And these cases take a long time. They can be really complex, especially when money is moving through lots of different bank accounts. And usually when a suspect is arrested, we seize their digital devices, and the extraction of those devices can take months or in fact years, because the evidence of what they have done is usually on a mobile telephone or on a laptop. Now, at the end of the investigation, if there's sufficient evidence, the case will be sent to the Crown Prosecution Service. So it's fraud cases in the UK, the decision to charge is all with the Crown Prosecution Service, and they'll make a decision whether or not somebody is charged. Now, whilst that is all ongoing, details will be sent to victims of victim support services, which are available throughout that process. Now, what are some prevention tips? So prevention is the best defense to combating fraud. So staying informed, I think today is exactly that. And I've certainly learned something today from the trading standards presentation, and you can get advice from other people as well. So banks will often provide short advice notes if you log into your banking app. I know Nationwide and NatWest customers will have seen that, often advising you about the latest scams, and advanced fee frauds has been a common theme recently. If you're able to, secure your devices and accounts using difficult passwords to prevent people accessing them. And if people come to you with unexpected requests, verify these, especially if it's online or over the phone. If you feel uncomfortable, you can end the call. Find the number that is used for the bank or go into the branch, and you can verify that person directly. You speak to that person directly. Be aware of pressure tactics. Again, stop and think, why is there an urgency to what we're doing here? Moving money between yourself and somebody else, there should never be any pressure on that transaction. There doesn't need to be in any circumstances. And I think is most importantly, and this has already been highlighted by Quinn, I think, is sharing your experiences. Talk with friends and family about requests and what's happened to you. And this isn't easy because of the way fraudsters exploit your trust and ask for secrecy, but sharing experiences can help reduce stigma and help others stay vigilant. And that, if I could get anything across today, it would be that. If we can talk openly throughout the community about what has happened in these cases, that will be the way that we end up preventing fraud. And we know absolutely we'll never prevent all fraud, but if people are aware of everything that's happening and all this crime that's taking place, then less people will be lured in by the fraudsters' tactics. So absolutely, the impact of fraud, it's not only about financial loss, it can be deeply personal. The way in which a fraudster exploits human psychology is manipulative, and victims will experience emotional trauma and a loss of trust in people and in systems. And that's why raising awareness and building resilience are so important. So I guess we can learn a bit more about that if I just talk about a brief case study. So what happens if you just say yes to a fraudster? So in 2020, Pam, it's not her real name, received a call to her landline, unsolicited contact. And the man on the landline said, "I'm a police officer." And the man told Pam that her cards, her bank cards, her Lloyd's bank cards, had been used to purchase a Rolex watch in a shopping centre. He exploited her trust because he wasn't a police officer, he was a fraudster. He told Pam that she needed to act quickly so that no further transactions could happen, manipulating the urgency of the situation. The reality was nothing had happened. Pam was sat at home in a living room, and this man was in an office calling her out of the blue. Nobody's buying a Rolex watch. But shaken up from this contact, as you would be, and thinking that they're a victim of fraud, Pam ended the call and decided to call the police herself. Absolutely the right thing to do. But unfortunately for her, due to the style of her landline phone, when she picked up the receiver again to call the police, the fraudster hadn't ended the call. So it reconnected when she tried to dial 101, reconnected the call to the fraudster. And thinking she was back onto the phone to 101, she was back on the phone to the same man. Now, that person confirmed her fears and told her that somebody, in this case a courier, would have to come to her house, collect her bank cards, and gave her a password that this courier would use. Now, that would be quite often the police would do that. So if you're perhaps at risk of harm or fraud, the police officer might give you a safe word to use. So that's a really clever tactic that the fraudster used. And that password was given to the courier in that case. Now, believing that she was a victim of crime because absolutely everything pointed to it, she gave him the PIN. Now, the courier arrived later that day, took the bank card off her, gave her the password, and said, "Thank you very much." Now, over the following days, he spent more than £100,000 on Pam's credit on her bank card, out of her debit account, on phones and laptops at that shopping centre. Now, fortunately, that activity flagged to her bank because for Pam, that was unusual activity to spend so much money. Now, part of the banking protocol meant that the bank contacted the police and they contacted the department that I worked for at the time. Now, I visited Pam and it took an incredibly long time to convince her what happened because the way the fraudster had exploited her human psychology. She simply didn't know who to trust anymore, whether it was me sat there opposite her in a suit or the man that she'd spoken to on the phone. But helpfully, by showing her her bank account records and explaining in detail what our role is and how that money had been spent and how that had worked, she clearly understood that she had been a victim of crime. Now, the investigation started, and using the phone data from Pam and the fraudster, the police were able to establish a link between the fraudster and the courier. We obtained CCTV from the shopping centre, and it's enabled us to show the people using her card and making those transactions. And with that information, 2 suspects were arrested and were charged by fraud with false representation. They hadn't covered the tracks well, and I think it was a bit of a testament to people who commit this crime don't think there's anyone after them because it's so prevalent and because the police do quite little in the majority of cases. They can use their own telephones. They can go to areas covered by CCTV. And in this case, they kept the items, some of the items that they had purchased using the bank card. Now, that was all great for the investigation. And fortunately, they were, having both been charged and sent to prison on remand, they accepted their role in the offence and they were convicted of that crime. Now, Pam's bank were able to refund her part of the loss, but clearly this ordeal had affected her mentally as well as financially. Now, she got some closure with that positive result, but I'd imagine ongoing it's still deeply distrustful of when people bring her up, and that's clearly had a really significant impact on her. Now, how to empower yourself against fraud. Now, we can fight back by recognising those fraudsters' tactics that I spoke about earlier. We can report the suspicious activity. The police will always record what you tell them. So if you call 101, even with suspicious activity and not a crime, we will record that on our systems and we can refer back to that at a later date. Now, we can empower yourself absolutely doing what we're doing today by learning about rogue trading, doorstep crime, and a little bit about fraud. And together we can try and make fraud a far riskier business for criminals and hopefully prevent our friends and loved ones becoming victims themselves. Now, that's the end of my presentation. I'll happily take any questions.